My name is Naomi Chen. I was 29 years old when I learned that being reasonable is often just another word people use when they want you to swallow your instincts. For most of my life, I believed maturity looked like restraint, not jumping to conclusions, not reading too much into tone shifts, not questioning people you loved unless you had proof. I thought trust was something you earned by being calm, by being understanding, by being the woman who didn't make things difficult. That's who I was when I met Ethan Brooks. We met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those loud apartment gatherings where everyone pretends they're not checking the time every 10 minutes. Ethan was standing near the kitchen, helping himself to chips like he lived there. He smiled when he saw me looking. Not a flirtatious smile, a steady one. We talked the entire night, not about anything impressive. Bad reality TV, true crime podcasts, how adulthood felt like pretending to understand wine labels. 2 days later, we went on our first date, then another, then another. Ethan was attentive without being overwhelming, the kind of man who remembered how I took my coffee and never forgot to text when he got home. When he proposed last October on the same beach where we'd had our first date, I cried so hard I could barely say yes. The wedding was set for June 15th, deposits paid, invitations sent, life mapped neatly forward. I thought I knew exactly who I was marrying. I was wrong. It started in April. We were sitting in his apartment, surrounded by wedding spreadsheets. I was on the couch with my laptop. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, papers spread around him like he was solving a crime scene. My final count is 97. I said, "How many do you have?" 103, he said without looking up, then added casually, "But I'm adding one more." I paused. "Who?" "Lena." The room shifted. Lena was his ex-girlfriend from college, 3-year relationship. They broke up right after graduation. Her name had surfaced more times than I was comfortable with, always harmlessly framed as history. I'd learned to brush it off. "Your ex?" I asked carefully. "Yeah," he said. "We've been talking lately. She reached out when she heard about the wedding. She's happy for me, wants to celebrate." Something tight settled in my chest. "Ethan, that's kind of weird, don't you think?" He finally looked up. "Why is it weird?" he asked. "She's part of my past. We're adults. Adults can be friends with their exes." "I'm not saying they can't," I said, "but inviting her to our wedding feels like crossing a line." "What line?" His voice sharpened just slightly. "Naomi, if you really cared about me, you wouldn't object. You'd trust me. You'd understand that my friendships matter." There it was. If I objected, I was insecure. If I hesitated, I didn't love him enough. "How long have you been talking to her?" I asked. "A few weeks," he said quickly. "She messaged me on Instagram to congratulate me. We just caught up." "And you didn't mention it?" "It didn't seem important." I sat there, trying to decide if the quiet voice inside me was intuition or paranoia. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe this was what emotional maturity looked like. "Fine," I said finally. "Invite her." His relief was immediate. He stood, crossed the room, wrapped his arms around me. "Thank you," he whispered. "This means a lot. This is why I love you. You're so understanding." I nodded, smiled, went back to my laptop. But something had already cracked. The phrasing, "We've been talking lately." The speed with which he turned my discomfort into a test of my love. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened my phone and looked Lena up. Lena was easy to find. Her profile wasn't private, no effort to hide, no sense that she had anything to be ashamed of. Lena Parker, 31, marketing consultant, location, Portland. The first thing I noticed wasn't her smile or her captions. It was the man standing next to her in almost every photo. Wedding ring visible. Same man, same face, same arm slung around her shoulders in different lighting, different seasons. His name was Matthew Parker. They'd been married almost 2 years. I sat on the edge of the bed with Ethan asleep beside me, breathing evenly, his phone charging on the nightstand like nothing in the world was wrong. If Lena was married, and she clearly was, why had Ethan turned inviting her into a loyalty test? Why had he framed it as proof of my love instead of a courtesy conversation? I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I watched. For 2 days, I carried the knowledge like a stone in my pocket, heavy, but grounding. I replayed every interaction in my head. The way Ethan had softened when he said her name. The way he'd never once mentioned she had a husband. On the third day, I called my sister Maya. Maya has always been my compass. She doesn't dramatize. She doesn't sugarcoat. She just sees clearly. She's married, I said, and Ethan didn't tell me. There was a pause on the line. He knows, Maya said finally, or he doesn't want you to know. What do I do? I think, she said carefully, you stop being the only honest person in this situation. That was how the idea formed, not revenge. Not exposure for exposure's sake. Transparency. It took me a full week to work up the nerve. I created a new Instagram account, no photo, no history, and messaged Matthew Parker directly. Hi, Matthew. You don't know me, but my name is Naomi Chen. I'm getting married next month. My fiancé recently invited your wife, Lena, to our wedding. I didn't realize they'd reconnected until she was added to the guest list. I wanted to reach out directly because I believe in transparency. Would you be willing to talk? He replied within an hour. What are you talking about? We spoke that night. Matthew wasn't angry at first, just confused, then quiet. She told me she'd been catching up with an old college friend. He said, didn't say it was her ex. Didn't say it was your wedding. She said it was someone from work. My stomach dropped. She told you she was going alone? Yes. The silence between us was thick. Matthew was a high school physics teacher, calm, methodical, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. By the end of the call, he was very still. I want to come to your rehearsal dinner, he said, as your guest. The rehearsal dinner. Ethan had insisted Lena attend even though she wasn't part of the wedding party. She'll feel awkward otherwise, he'd said, and I want her to meet everyone. I sent Matthew the details. June 14th, 6:30 p.m., downtown restaurant, family only. The week leading up to it, Ethan was stressed, seating charts, flowers, last-minute RSVPs. I was calm, suspiciously calm. You're being so chill, he said one night, laughing. Most brides would be losing it by now. I trust things to work out the way they're supposed to, I said. He kissed my forehead. That's why we're perfect together. I smiled and waited. June 14th arrived warm and unforgiving, the kind of evening where everything feels heightened, voices louder, smiles brighter, nerves stretched thin beneath pressed clothing. The restaurant sat on a corner downtown, all exposed brick and soft amber lighting, intimate, carefully chosen, 40 seats, family, the wedding party, no strangers. I arrived early with my parents, my brother Lucas, Maya, and her husband. Ethan arrived shortly after with his parents and his younger sister. Everyone was relaxed, laughing, taking photos, talking about tomorrow like it was guaranteed. Lena walked in at exactly 7 p.m. She was taller than I expected, confident posture, navy dress, hair curled just enough to look effortless. She scanned the room once, and when she saw Ethan, her face lit up. She crossed the room fast. Ethan, she said, wrapping her arms around him. The hug lasted a second longer than necessary. I watched his mother notice. I watched his father stiffen. Everyone, Ethan said brightly. This is Lena. We went to college together. Together. She shook hands around the table like she belonged there. When she reached me, she smiled warmly. You must be Naomi. I've heard so much about you. I'm sure, I said, matching her smile. I seated Lena 3 chairs down from Ethan, close enough to talk, close enough to matter. At 7 to 20 pages, Matthew Parker walked in. I stood immediately. He wore a charcoal blazer, crisp and understated. He looked exactly like someone who knew he was walking into a moment that would change everything. Matthew, I said, loud enough for nearby conversations to pause. Thank you for coming. He nodded, calm, grounded. This is my friend Matthew, I said to the table. We met through a mutual connection, and I wanted him here tonight. Maya caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. Lena hadn't noticed yet. She was laughing at something Ethan's sister said, head tilted, hand resting briefly on Ethan's arm. Then Matthew sat down. Directly across from her. I watched the color drain from Lena's face. Her smile froze. Her eyes widened. For half a second, she looked like someone who had stepped onto thin ice and heard it crack. She stood abruptly. Excuse me, she said. Matthew remained seated. I need the restroom, she added quickly. I'll come with you, Ethan said, already rising. Matthew spoke calmly. You don't need to. The room went silent. Lena's voice shook. Matthew, what are you doing here? He folded his hands on the table. I'm here because my wife was invited, he said evenly, and because I wanted to hear why you told me you were attending a work event. The word wife landed like glass. Every face turned. Ethan looked at me. I sipped my water. You're married? Ethan asked Lena, his voice barely audible. Matthew smiled. It wasn't kind. We've been married 2 years, he said. I'm Matthew Parker, Lena's husband. The table stopped breathing. Lena's mouth opened, closed. You told me you were divorced, Ethan said. Oh. Matthew tilted his head. When did you tell him that, Lena? She didn't answer. Ethan looked at me again, panic setting in. You knew, he said. I found out after you insisted on inviting her, I replied calmly. I thought it would be nice for her husband to join us. This is insane, Ethan said, standing. Naomi, this is not what it looks like. Then explain it, I said. Explain why you've been talking for months. Explain why you hid her marriage. Explain why you turned my discomfort into a test of loyalty. Silence. Matthew stood. I don't need to hear this here, he said. Lena, we're leaving. She reached for him. He stepped back. They left. No yelling. No scene, just devastation trailing behind them. Ethan turned to me. I was confused, he said. I didn't know what I wanted. That was my answer. The wedding's off, I said. I stood, took off my ring, placed it on the table. I'm done. The next 48 hours were chaos. Ethan called me 37 times. I know because I counted before blocking his number. His mother called. His sister texted paragraphs that started with, I don't know the whole story, but. Lena tried once from a number I didn't recognize. I blocked that, too. I stayed on Maya's couch. My wedding dress was still hanging in Ethan's closet. The veil was laid out on the bed like it was waiting for a body that never came back. Maya brought coffee the next morning and sat beside me without speaking for a long time. That was the most controlled destruction I've ever witnessed. She finally said, I'm proud of you. I feel like I should feel worse, I admitted. You didn't end a good relationship, she said. You ended a lie. My parents called that afternoon. We support you, my mom said gently. Whatever you need. Ethan's parents wanted to know if there was any way to salvage things. Too much money had been spent. Too many people invited. It's cheaper than a divorce, I said, and meant it. A week later, Matthew texted me. Thank you for inviting me, he wrote. You saved me from finding out 5 years and 2 kids from now. The divorce should be finalized by August. I stared at the message longer than necessary. Better to know now. I heard through a mutual friend that Lena had been telling Ethan she regretted letting him go. That Ethan had been telling her marrying someone else was a mistake. Nothing physical, just months of emotional intimacy carefully hidden from daylight. Enough to poison 2 lives. Lena moved back in with her parents. Ethan lost his job a month later. Nothing official tied to the wedding, just performance issues. Distraction, apparently, has consequences. The wedding website is still live. I never had to log in. Every so often, someone texts asking what happened. Irreconcilable differences, I reply. It's easier than explaining that sometimes the biggest betrayals don't scream. They smile. They call you mature. They ask you to prove your love by abandoning your instincts. The ring is in my nightstand now. I haven't sold it. I haven't thrown it away, not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I refused to settle for.